what we're going to focus on here today is we're going to focus on the ratification of the Constitution and some of the provisions within the Constitution. We're also going to take a look at what the Constitution accomplished, right? Because when we left off last time, we were talking about the issues within the Articles of Confederation and how the Congress was severely limited. We didn't have a Okay, so y'all can hear me. Let me see. Let me do a mic check really quickly. Can you all hear me or no? Just want to make sure that y'all can hear me. Let me do something. Let me adjust the volume here. See, first issues with internet connection, now issues with the voice recognition. So, can you all hear me or no? No one can hear me. Please tell me if y'all can hear me. Nobody really can hear me. Okay, hold on. Let me try something else. Hold on. Okay, hold on. Okay, so let me type this out. I just want to see if y'all can hear me or not. Okay, that cannot. Okay. Okay, let's see. So what about everyone else? I just had trouble finding. Okay, all right. So Jesse can hear me, but Ella can. Okay, so Ella, go ahead and maybe what I would recommend for you to do is to I guess. Okay, hold on. Let me type this out. Okay, it looks like she's doing that. Yeah, no, it's been that kind of day, right? There was issues on my end and issues, so it's fine. These technical issues, they do happen. That's um it's fine. These technical issues happen. But anyway, so yeah, let's go ahead and get started here really quickly. Um, so like we were mentioning right now, we left off last time on our discussions on the Articles of Confederation and all the big problems that they had. So obviously, of course, the framers basically felt like, you know what, we're just going to have to scrap that. We're going to have to start all over. We're going to have to do something different, right? So that's what they ultimately did with the passage of the Constitution. So we're going to take a look at the key provisions within the Constitution in terms of, the branches of government that we have today. As I've said before, everyone, I would probably say that this is, if not the most, probably one of the most, concepts that we're going to be covering within our class here. So, um, in the next chapters, we're definitely going to be referencing chapter 2 again, in terms of going back to the, checks and balances and all that stuff. And the reason why this is, of course, so important is because everything that every decision that's made in our government, right? Every law, every policy is based on our Constitution, right? Everything has to be constitutional. So we have to have a good understanding of what our Constitution says so that we can see how government is supposed to operate within the frameworks of the Constitution, right? So that's why this chapter is going to be extremely important, right? Because it's going to give the building blocks of government. Chapter 1 also kind of gave us the definitions of government. Now we're actually going to look at how our American style of government is actually put into practice and how we actually see it to this day, right? So that's why these first two chapters are extremely important. But okay, like I said, so for those of you who showed up, stop by right now, just know that we're going to have to end a little bit early because I have to go to a training here in a bit. So, and like I said, it's for me to be able to maintain my online teaching certification. So this is something I have to do. Anyway, okay, so let me go ahead and share the content really quickly, and then we'll get started here. So. Okay, so really quickly, like I said, we'll cover what we need to really quickly here. And if we need to pick up a little bit next week, that's fine. We can also do so as well. That's also not a problem. So let's try to do what we can here. Okay, so when we're looking at the Constitution here, so first off, let's start with the so we left off with the founders basically saying, you know what, we got to do something different with the articles. So ultimately, they originally tried to amend the articles, but then they just decided, you know what, these articles are just too unworkable. We're just going to have to start from scratch again. So, um, originally the framers were pretty much in agreement in terms of the need to have these three branches of government, to have a legislative, executive, and judicial branch. They were in agreement that the federal government did need to gain power, but there was disagreement about how much power for the national government to have, as well as how the national government was going to be represented in terms of how the representation in Congress would occur. So that leads us to some of these plans here, right? So when we look at the Virginia plan versus the New Jersey plan, this is important because in order to determine how Congress was going to be, when I say apportioned, basically that means is what was the system that was going to be put in place to determine how people would get to Congress, how many representatives each state would get in Congress. You know, that's important to know, right? Because you have to determine the rules for how Congress is going to be populated. So Edmund Randolph of Virginia offered a resolution that proposed the Virginia Plan. The Virginia Plan called for a system of representation based on state population or proportion of each state's revenue contribution to the national government or both. So basically what this means is that the state of Virginia was wanting to have as many members in Congress as possible because Virginia was a highly populated state. In fact, Virginia was the most highly populated state out of the original 13. A lot of that, of course, was because of the slaves that they had, right? Which we'll get into that with the Three-Fifths Compromise. Um, so Virginia, Virginia would be stupid not to do this, right? Virginia saying, okay, we got more people, we deserve more representation, we deserve more political power in the Congress because we have a lot more people in this state than other states, right? So, straightforward argument, right? Who could really argue against that in terms of the logic? But in terms of other viewpoints that also made logical sense, we also had the New Jersey plan, right? Both of these plans made a lot of sense logically, right? So opponents claimed the plan was biased in favor of large states, right? So New Jersey was saying, no, the representation should not be based on population. It should be equal representation, right? And that's what it used to be in the articles, right? Remember that the articles had the states had the states had the same number of votes, right? They had, each state had its own vote regardless of population. So they wanted to kind of go back to what the articles did, where each state would have this equal representation, because the argument that New Jersey was making was, well, just because we have less people doesn't mean that our political concerns are less valid, right? I mean, so, and again, both of these sides were making compelling arguments, right? So ultimately, we had the Great Compromise ushered by Roger Sherman of Connecticut here, which basically combined two of these ideas, right? It combined the two ideas to where the Great Compromise, creates a bicameral legislature, right? So now, and this, of course, this Great Compromise still is in effect today, right? Because this is the way our current Congress is set up, right? Where the House of Representatives, which is a lot larger than the Senate, these representatives are apportioned by population in the state. So what this means here is that your larger populated states are going to have more members of Congress within the House, right? So remember, so the House has a lot more members because this is based on population, right? So large populated states like California, Texas, Florida, New York, they're going to have a lot more members within Congress in terms of the House, as opposed to states like Wyoming, Montana, the Dakotas, Vermont, even Alaska. This is something I always like to throw out to my students every semester. Did you all know? Here's an interesting fact. Did you all know that there are more people that live in the valley than live in the state of Alaska? And just think about that, right? There are more people that live down here. We've got over 1 million people living down here. That's more than the population of Alaska, more than Montana, more than North Dakota, South Dakota, more than Vermont. So in terms of population, the valley could be its own state, and it certainly would have enough people to be its own state, right? In terms of just looking at population, right? So this is just something I like to throw out there because I don't know if any of y'all have ever thought of this before, but yeah, we live in the fourth most populated area in the entire state, right? It's the DFW Metroplex, then it's Houston Metro, then it's San Antonio. I guess maybe you could combine San Antonio and Austin eventually. That's going to be the I-35 corridor, and then fourth is us, the Rio Grande Valley. The valley is fourth in terms of population. We have more people than in the El Paso area, which used to be fourth. Let me check the chat really quickly. What did somebody say in the chat here? Didn't know that. Yes, yes, exactly. If you stop and think about it, yeah, we've got a lot of people that live down here, right? I certainly can see it with all the traffic now, but that's why I'm glad I get to work from home on Mondays and Wednesdays. But anyway, so that's the way the House is apportioned, right? It's based on the number. It's based on population, right? So since Texas has over 30 million people, they have the second most, the second most number of House members. California's first because they are the most highly populated, the highest populated state, but Texas has the second most, right? So Texas is going to have the second most number of House members. And then in the Senate, the House takes the Virginia plan, right? The Senate uses the New Jersey plan in that states have equal representation regardless of population. So this means that every state is going to have two senators, right? There's 100 senators. Every state has two senators because we have 50 states, right? So 50 times two, that equals 100, right? So it doesn't matter whether it's a large state like California or Texas, right? Those states are going to have two senators, and then small states like Alaska, Vermont, Montana, they're also going to have two senators, right? So that's why, that's why I wouldn't want Ted Cruz's job, honestly, because he's got to be a senator for 30 million people. It's not like him and Corden split up the population and be like, okay, you take 15 million, I take 15 million. No, they're responsible for all the people. So I don't know how that guy sleeps at night. I don't know if he's in Cancun again right now since it's cold. And I'm just joking, but no. The point is that I wouldn't want like a job like that because that's a lot of responsibility. If you're gonna do the job well, like there's no way I'd be able to sleep at night knowing that I'd be responsible for that many people. But it is what it is. I stress out just with the number of students I have in my classes. Right, I teach a lot of classes, so that already stresses me out. So imagine like multiplying that by a bunch. So but anyway, it is what it is. So, okay. So with that being said, just want to make sure that you all understand the way the Great Compromise works, right? That this is the way our current Congress is set up, right? Where the House members are selected based on population numbers. That's how many. That's why Texas has so many. And then in the Senate, it's equally based on population here. Okay. So let's get to the 3/5 compromise really quickly, and then we'll move on to a quick discussion on the branch of the government here, right? So to build support for the Constitution, slave and non-slave states needed to reach a compromise. Now, you all probably remember this from history class, right? This was something that was greatly discussed here within American history, right? And so the 3/5 compromise, of course, was very unfortunate, right? Because you had a situation where the slaves were not being afforded citizenship status and any of the rights that went with that, such as the right to vote, but they were still being counted in the population numbers, right? So Virginia was basically saying, as I mentioned a little while ago, right, the reason why Virginia was the highest populated state was because of all the slaves that they had there, right? So the that's why when people say, like, when people think of the slavery issue, people usually think of the Civil War, right? That's usually the first thought that comes to people's minds when they think of the slavery issue. But no, the slavery issue was going on way, way before the Civil War. That was just where it came to a boiling point where, we had to fight a war over it to finally decide that issue once and for all. But way before the Civil War, this was something that was deeply dividing the nation. And so this was another example of that division where, again, Virginia wanted for the slaves to count 1 to 1. But the northern states said, no, we're not going to count the slaves at all because they're not citizens, right? They shouldn't be involved in the political process. If you're not going to involve them in the political process, then why should we have them, be involved when it comes to the numbers, right? When it comes to the apportionment, when it comes to the representation, right? If they're not citizens, then why are they going to be represented, right? That was the argument that the North was making. So ultimately, the reason why they had to compromise on this was because the Southern delegates would not agree to the new government if Northerners refused to bargain on this issue, right? So this basically meant that the Constitution would not have been ratified. They needed 9 out of the 13 states to ratify it. So you would have had to have gotten a few Southern states, and that's of course what I'm trying to say is that you would need a few Southern states, provided that you got all the Northern states to agree, which not all the Northern states did, right? So they had to get a large amount of the Southern states to ultimately agree to the Constitution. So they needed to come up with this compromise, right? Where the compromise was that seats in the House would be apportioned by population, which involved counting 5 slaves as 3 free persons, right? So that's why it's called 3/5, right? So 1 slave would count as 3/5 of a person, right? So they kind of had to they kind of had to still count them, but they count them almost like half time, so to speak, right? Or well, 3/5, actually, but so they counted them, not 1 to 1, but they counted them, somewhat here. So yeah, and again, and we'll talk about how, when we get to chapter 5, we'll talk more about the Civil War and Reconstruction, and then the Jim Crow era afterwards, right? So okay, anyway, so the goals of the Constitution, right? So the framers sought several goals in creating the new government: a central government strong enough to promote commerce and protect property, as we mentioned last time. The national government would have the power to be able to, to ensure that property rights would be respected, and then later on we'll talk about the idea of protecting commerce, right? To ensure that trading, between the states and among the states would be conducted, with those that national oversight, right? That you wouldn't have like one state screwing the other state over, right? That they would have to, any type of interstate relations would have to be approved and okayed by the national government, right? The national government would be in charge of interstate affairs, right? And we've kind of talked about this before, right? That if you have a situation where you've got two states that are trying to enter an agreement, which law, which policy are they going to follow, right? Well, they're going to follow the national policy, right? The federal policy, because that is meant as a way to, provide fairness for those two states here, right? So they kind of act as the referee, so to speak, between the two states, so to speak. Um, Prevention of excessive democracy. So yeah, one of the videos that I have here that's really good is the John Green video, Crash Course History, which talks about the U.S. Constitution. He talks about this whole concept of excessive democracy, right? Where the framers did not, and this was very contentious, right? Because you had the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists who were going back and forth on this. The Federalists, of course, they didn't really trust the electorate to grasp the intricacies of democracy, so to speak, because you have to remember that at the time most Americans were not college educated, right? I mean, there's still a lot of Americans who are not college educated, right? So it's the Federalists felt that they couldn't trust the common American voter to make the so-called informed decision when it comes to an election. So that's why they put a lot of safeguards in place, right? That's why we have the Electoral College, which we'll talk about later on in the course, right? The idea that you're not actually directly electing a president, right? But that you're voting for the electors who will then select the president, right? You have that extra step in place. Another example of excessive democracy was that the senators would not be elected directly by the people; they would be elected by state legislators. Which we had the 17th Amendment, which repealed that to where now we can vote for U.S. senators, but originally it wasn't going to be the direct vote for the senators, right? Emphasis on ideas that would generate public support. So trying to tap into the general will of the people and try to get a sense for some of these important American ideals, so to speak, right? And the restraint of the federal government from impinging on liberties. We'll talk more about this in chapter 4. This is where we have the Bill of Rights that are going to come into play. This idea of protection against too much government involvement in people's personal lives. So we'll talk about some of those amendments like freedom of speech, freedom of religion within the First Amendment. We'll also talk about unreasonable searches and seizures with the Fourth Amendment. And so the bicameral legislature, like we said, is an assembly composed of two chambers or houses distinguished from unicameral here. So, okay, so constitutional limits on the national government's power. So we'll talk about some of these right here within this chapter, as well as the next couple of chapters. We're going to talk about checks and balances, which is a mechanism through which each branch of government is able to participate and influence the activities of other branches. The checks and balances system is really important, right? Because it's meant as a way to keep the three branches, somewhat. You don't want to have one branch that takes too much power, right? Especially when it came to the executive branch. We'll talk later on how the executive branch was probably the branch that was the most feared, in terms of asserting more power than the other branches, because the executive branch is the one branch where one person controls the entire branch, right? We have the president, right, that is in charge of the decisions that are made on the executive side. Another reason why this is alarming, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but where constitutionalists would say that we have to keep tabs on the presidency, is because the executive branch is by far the largest of the three branches. Almost any federal job is under the executive. It's very lopsided. Like there's very few jobs under the judicial branch. There's very few jobs under the legislative branch. Almost all of the jobs in the federal government are under the executive. So because of that very Now that's not the way it used to be, right? Obviously, of course, we'll talk about in chapter 3 how the federal government really expanded in power during the New Deal policies. But nowadays, this is why a lot of people tend to be very cautious of the executive because, like I said, it's by far the largest. But again, we'll talk more about this in this chapter and other discussions later on. So the Bill of Rights, citizens are guaranteed a list of rights. We'll talk about those in chapter 4. Separation of powers. There are 3 different branches of government with checks and balances. So the separation of powers is where, so checks and balances is where we have mechanisms in place to check the other branches, right? Like where the branches have to get involved in the major decisions that are made in, at the federal level, right? So an example would be like the appointment of federal judges, right? That's an example where you have, like all 3, branches that are involved, right? Where you've got the president making the appointment, but then they don't go and serve immediately. They have to get confirmed by the Senate. But again, we'll talk more about these once we get towards the end of this chapter here. And then, so again, the separation of powers is where you separate the duties and responsibilities within government, right? Where, again, it's how we would sum up the 3 branches, right? The legislative branch, they pass the laws. The executive branch, they enforce the laws. And the judicial branch, they interpret the laws, right? So it's a little more nuanced than that, but if we could just kind of sum it up really quickly, that's how we would say it, right? Because you're separating those powers. You don't want for the executive branch to legislate, right? You also don't want for the judicial branch to legislate, right? You want to ensure that those responsibilities are separate from each other. That's why Supreme Court decisions and executive orders can be somewhat controversial because some people might feel that the president or the Supreme Court is overstepping their boundaries, so to speak. Which again, that'll be another good point that we'll also continue to talk about throughout the class here. And then federalism, which is the national government shares power with the states. This is going to be the emphasis of our next chapter, chapter 3, where we talk about that balancing of power between the national government and the states, where the national government doesn't just control everything, right? We have states that also have a lot of power when it comes to their responsibilities, right? And so we'll talk about that, more so in chapter 3 here really quickly. Okay, so let's see. We've got, okay, because let's see. I want to see how much more we've got. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we'll definitely. Let's see. Yeah, we can. Let's see if we want to do this really quickly first, because I know we got to get to this really quickly. Okay. Well, let's see how much we can go. Let's see. Let's go through the branches, and then we'll see how much time we have left, because I do have to leave in a couple of minutes, but we'll see. Okay. Excuse me. So let's see. Okay, so let's run through these 3 branches really quickly. Now, let me also mention everyone to all that. And again, if I'm sorry about that, all 3 of these branches are going to have their own chapter later on. This is going to be towards the end of the semester. So we're going to there's going to be a chapter that's totally devoted to Congress. There's going to be a chapter devoted to the presidency. There's going to be a chapter devoted to the federal courts, including the Supreme Court. So this that we're going to go over really quickly. This is just the cliff notes for the cliff notes in terms of these different branches, right? So we're just going to cover them very briefly, and then we'll go in more into detail on these branches later on within their respective chapters. So the legislative branch, right? So this is in Article 1 of the Constitution, right? Article 1 is by far the and then next time when we meet, because we're not going to finish this chapter today, since like I said, I have to leave early. So instead, what we'll do is next time we'll go over the Constitution. We'll actually kind of look through it really quickly, and then we'll cover the last part of the chapter here. So for now, let's take a look at the branches, and then we'll actually look at the Constitution next time here. So in Article 1, which is the first article of the Constitution, the Constitution provides for a Congress consisting of 2 chambers. Now, next time when we go over the Constitution, you'll see that Article 1 is by far the longest of the articles, right? It's got 10 sections, right? So it's definitely the wordiest and the lengthiest, right? So within the Constitution, you will see that. Well, you know what? Hold on. Let me show it to you all first, because you know what? I think it's better that we do it that way. Let me go ahead and show it to you all really quickly, so that way you can kind of visualize what I'm talking about here. Yeah, I think that's a better idea. Okay, let me click on this here, and then let's see. Is this the? Okay, let's see. Yeah, this is it right here. Okay. No, this is okay. Hold on. Wait. No, this is the outline here really quickly. Give me just a moment. Hold on. Let me go ahead and because I have it saved. There's the transcription. Okay. Yeah. Let's just go ahead and let me just kind of show it to you really quickly, so that way you all can kind of get a better sense for it here. So okay. All right. Okay, let's see. Okay, all right. So yeah, before we actually start breaking down the Constitution, yeah, I think it's best that we look at it right now here. Um, so this, of course, is the transcription of the Constitution. So at the beginning of the chapter, of course, we looked at the preamble, right? We the people of the United States, which again is why our book is titled that way, right? It's the very beginning of our Constitution. In order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America, right? So we definitely discussed the preamble at the beginning of our chapter discussion in terms of what all this means. And so you're going to see as we look through the Constitution really quickly. And I think this will be the last thing that we'll do for today. Yeah, we'll go more into detail on the articles next time here. So let me also mention to you all really quickly that well, we'll see. I'll get back to you in terms of what we do for the chapter 2 due dates. I'll let me take some time to kind of think about this, right? Because um, let's see if we can, because that's probably gonna have to push back chapter 3 as well. But again, we'll talk about that when we get next time here. So okay, so what I want to show you all really quick is I want to show you all the different articles, right? So again, Article 1 is by far the longest of the articles, right? You can see how it has 10 sections here. Um, within Article 1, this basically discusses within the different sections. This discusses the establishment of Congress here in terms of Section 1, what the qualifications are in Section 2. There's also how they meet and how they have to keep a record here within Section 3 in terms of how they set up the Congress. In terms of they choose their officers, set up their rules. Like we saw this a couple of weeks ago when Kevin McCarthy became the speaker. They have their procedure for how the speaker is elected here. We'll talk more about that in the Congress chapter. So then Section 4 again talks about how they have to meet they have to meet at least once a year, although now they meet continuously. So again, if Section 6 discusses compensation. Section 5 talks about how they have to keep a record. Section 7 talks about how there's some of the requirements for like the revenue bills shall start in the House. This basically means that any bill that has to do with money has to start in the House, right? Because there are some differences, right? There are some things that only the House does, and there are some things that only the Senate does, right? Like we'll talk about the confirmation process, right? Where that goes to the Senate. The House doesn't get involved with the confirmation of appointed officials by the president. Now, Section 8 is probably the most important section within Article 1. This discusses this is basically Congress's job description, right? This is what they're responsible for, which, again, we'll go more into detail on this next time here when we look at some of these provisions, right? But this is what Congress is responsible for in terms of what they, the laws that they pass that all has to fall within these requirements here. One that I will mention really quickly is rule of naturalization. This is immigration. It's a fancy way of saying immigration, but we know it more so today as immigration. So this is what gives Congress the authority to pass immigration law, and also of course by extension then the executive branch is responsible for enforcing those laws, right? So that's why immigration is a federal responsibility. Moving on to Article 2, this discusses the president. This first section discusses the Electoral College, which again, we'll talk more about that later on. We also see here Section 2, this discusses the commander-in-chief role, one of the major roles that the president has, basically being in charge of the military. Let's see, Section 3 discusses the State of the Union here, and then Section 4, this basically this is the definition for impeachment here. Article 3 discusses the court system, the federal court system. It doesn't mention judicial review here. That's something that the court was able to assert itself in Marbury versus Madison. But basically, it talks about that the judicial power should be vested in the Supreme Courts and inferior courts. Congress has the right to establish more courts. Right now we have 3 levels of federal courts. Congress can also decide, the different levels as well as the number of judges that serve on these courts as well. So. And then some more of these articles deal with, some of the other things we're going to talk about, like the privileges and immunities, fair faith and credit. And then just scrolling over here really quickly, let's see, does it have the amendments here? Interestingly, okay, it doesn't. I thought it did, but that's fine. There's 27 amendments, which we'll discuss some of those later on here. So, Okay, everyone. So let's go ahead and stop here for today because I know it's already going to be time. So sorry that I have to leave early here, but we'll go ahead and finish chapter 2 next time here. And then, like I said, I'll see like if maybe we have to push some due dates back for like chapter 2 and chapter 3. But I'll keep you updated on that really quickly. So before we end, does anybody have any questions or else that I can see? Look, they're already emailing me to get to my training. I bet. No, nobody has any questions or anything like that, or nothing else. Okay. All right. Well, that was okay. That was good timing. All right. I'm pretty sure that that's an email like saying like I I'm joking, right? They're not actually saying go to the training, but I think they're sending me like the training information. So like to check in and all that stuff. So but okay, everyone. So I guess we'll go to an end here for today. So thanks so much. Sorry that we had to cut everything short, but we'll finish off chapter 2 next time. Okay, everyone. So be safe, be warm, and have a good weekend. And I'll update you all on what we'll do with the because I'm leaning towards pushing back the chapter 2 deadline. So I'll let you know how that works. Okay, everyone. So you all take care, be safe, and we'll see you all on Monday. Okay, everyone. And please email me if you have any questions. Okay. Okay, everybody. Take care. Bye, everyone. Take care. Take care.